Hello and welcome to another ETTO spoiler cast. Today we are talking all things The Last of Us Season 1. I am Sam, and today I'm here with...
I'm Ben.
And I'm Finch.
We're just going to go over our brief non-spoiler thoughts. Brief. Some people in here, brief. Ben?
No, wow.
I'm joking. I'm joking. No, I'm joking.
Straight for the gut.
No, but Ben, I'll start with you because I know that you did really enjoy this show, from what I've heard anyway. What did you think overall?
This show's fantastic. I did not expect to like this show nearly as much as I did. I played both the games, and I love both the games. I'm probably not as like super high on the games as a lot of people are. I think they're very good, but they're not in my like favorite games of all time like they're for some people. But having said that, I was like, I think many people felt similarly to me where they were like, what's the point of this? Like, is it just going to retell the same story? And like, is it possible for it to do it any better? And all those kind of things. And it's like, if you've played the game, will it be worth watching? And I think very quickly all those questions were answered. It is telling the story of the game, but telling it in a way that is fit for television as opposed to fit for a video game. And I think both of them do a good job with the medium they are in now and like stand well together, but also well separately. And I think that is an impressive feat considering how story heavy the games are, that it doesn't just feel like they've plucked the story out of the game and put it into the TV show. At the same time, they plucked a lot of stuff out of the game and put it into the TV show. But I think the places in which they've done that, and like where they've chosen to do that versus where they've chosen to go in their own direction was really well informed, and really like the choices made there was clearly a lot of thought put into it. It wasn't just like randomly like picking and choosing. So I'm impressed at their ability to probably be really like clinical and critical of like their own work, and like this show also revises a lot of stuff from that first game that I think maybe nowadays we all look back on and are like, yeah, that was kind of so-so. And so like it's impressive that they kind of looked at that and were like, you know what, we're going to change some stuff up. So yeah, I think I came out of it loving it. I'm very both fascinated, but also, given how well they did this season, interested in what's going to come in a season 2 and 3. The one thing this show has done is reestablished a lot of discourse from about 10 years ago, and the next season is going to reestablish a lot of discourse from about 3 years ago. So that's going to be great. I love that.
Amazing.
But yeah, no, I think they've done a very good job, and I'm excited to get more deep into it as we do this podcast.
For sure. I definitely agree with your point there, where the show had enough of the game to keep people happy, but it also had elements that they've brought into the show that aren't necessarily in the game to make it its own sort of thing, which I thought was really well done. Joshua, what do you think?
I absolutely loved the show. I liked, I same as Ben, I liked how it was still part of the game, like still had the game in, like the story of the game in there, but it also was able to be a little bit different, like its own sort of thing as well. And I just liked how, I think the TV show and the game kind of complement each other. In the game, there were backstories to people that weren't in the game. That was really really well brought out in the TV show. And I think if those storylines were in the game, I don't think it'd be probably as good as it is. But I think that was good. I don't know if I was rambling, but I think it was
makes sense.
Because I think a TV show is where the backstories are well explained, sort of thing. So I don't think something like episode 3 would have fit in the game, whereas it fits here.
You have a lot more space to focus on specific characters, whereas in the game you got to play as Joel, so it's like
absolutely
it's all built around Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of Joel, the actor who is playing him is Pedro Pascal, otherwise known as the Mandalorian, and playing Ellie is Bella Ramsey, where I think before this, the only real thing I knew her from was Game of Thrones, but even then...
they're both Game of Thrones alumni, actually.
Yeah, they are.
Pedro Pascal's first main role.
Yeah, totally. But more with Bella, it was kind of... I hadn't really seen her anything prior to this, so I was very interested in how they were going to perform. I think this is one of the castings where it was one of the most sort of hyped up and controversial, I guess, that I've seen online. These are obviously two characters that are very much adored by millions of people and have been that way for a few years now. So how do we all think they went as playing Ellie and Joel? Josh, do you want to go first and tell us what you thought of them?
I think it was really well, the casting. Like I think with Joel, you needed somebody who was kind of a big-ish name. And then with Ellie, it was good having a almost nobody, but a good actor.
A more unknown person,
Yeah. And I think just their dynamic from the first episode together was just really good. Was Ellie in the first episode? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't remember.
Very briefly.
Yeah.
They met in the first episode, I think.
Towards the end.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, from that moment on, it was actually, they gelled on screen together, and from behind the scenes, they gelled really well. So, I think it worked really well.
Yeah, sick. Benjamin?
My hot take is, to me, this is the better version of the characters now. I think the portrayals in the game is very good. I think in making it in a game, you lose an element of the performance that you can keep in a live action TV show, because obviously you have to go through motion capture, and Last of Us has always set a standard for being at the peak of that kind of motion capture and all that kind of stuff. So it's not me being that version is bad, but I think what Pedro and Bella bring to the respective roles are a level of nuance in body language and emotion that couldn't ever come across in a video game, but also I think from Pedro Pascal, and Troy Baker is a fantastic voice and performance capture artist, and I think he's great at that, but I think what Pedro Pascal brings is just an extra level of professional nuance and skill to the role, and he just has this phenomenal ability to portray so much just through body language and without saying much, and I think he does that so well throughout this show. And similarly with Bella, I think Ellie is a character that is beloved by many, and Ashley Johnson's portrayal, I would argue, is even more beloved than Troy Baker's portrayal, and so she is inevitably stepping into a much bigger shoes.
Yeah. Sure.
And very quickly within even the first episode, when you first see her chained up in that room, to the end of the show, but very quickly she made the role her own, and it was this is Ellie, but this is Bella's version of Ellie, and that's that's incredibly impressive for a character that we know even more of from The Last of Us lore than Joel, because obviously Joel is not as big of a part of The Last of Us 2. So it's people are more attached to Ellie than I would say they are to Joel over time. And so the fact that she was able to take that and make it her own, but also still do justice to the character, very quickly, I was there's differences to this portrayal, but I believe this is Ellie. She is the same character. It's not
for sure
night and day difference. So I think they were fantastic. And I think I think the show also did a really good job in other castings where sometimes it actually just was the actor from the game, and sometimes it wasn't. And I think it really benefits from being able to do that where it can. And obviously they were never going to be able to do that with Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson for age, skill, a variety of other reasons.
Yeah.
But it's when they did it, they Marlene was the same actor from the video games, and I think there's one or two others, and that the fact that they were able to identify those people and be like, well, we could do it here and it'll have the exact same effect and all that kind of stuff, I think is really good. So I think casting across the board was fantastic, but especially with the main two.
Yeah, no, I agree. With Ellie and Joel, like, I was very, I guess, intrigued as to how they would go about it going into it. Because, you know, obviously being a live action TV show, even if it was a movie or anything else live action, it's a very different sort of acting gig than what you were saying, Ben, where it's like, it's different than watching them do a motion capture in a studio and then putting that into a game. I think there is a very different level of emotion that you can see there, obviously, from seeing a real person going through these things rather than like a game character. I warmed up to Joel a little bit more than more early on than I did Ellie. Not like I can't really put my finger on it as to why. Maybe it's because it's the Mandalorian, and I was like, but no, I mean, I was a bit like I definitely loved the scene that Ellie had where she was in chains, and they're asking her to count to 10, and she's giving them, like, you know, her sass and attitude. I thought that was great. But I needed to see more of her performance to really be sold on it. But by the end of the series, there was so many moments where I was like, yeah, look, that is Ellie. I know that a lot of people still aren't a fan of the choices in casting. I think with anything, people are just going to be unhappy no matter how good of a job they do.
Totally. And like, the other thing to say on that is people are super protective over, like, that's the problem with any adaptation. People are super protective over the characters they know. So some people are just not going to be satisfied.
I feel like for this sort of like franchise as well, it's on a different level because you experience such emotional moments with these characters through the games that people kind of attach themselves to them on an emotional level because of what you've sort of gone through with them throughout the stories of part 1 and 2. But speaking on like the game moving to TV, overall, how do we think they did at like trying to adapt that story into a live action format?
I think I've said a decent amount of my piece on it, so I'll just add a couple of things. I think I was impressed by their ability to convert Joel's presence as the playable character in the game into a character within the show, because I would argue he's not even the main character within the show. Like, it's pretty equal share between him and Ellie and stuff. Whereas in the first game, like, he's very much the core character, but it's also a difficult transition to go from being able to identifying with the character you play as to then being someone that you are watching that you don't have that attachment to. And I think I was impressed with their ability to kind of take particularly like the elements of the game which are very contingent on you playing as Joel and make them have a similar effect, even if not exactly the same effect. Make them feel similarly so that it doesn't feel like you're getting a different story to the game, just an adjustment to how that story is being told. That comes through like flashbacks and focusing on other characters and that kind of thing. As I think Josh briefly mentioned, when they take a full episode to do something that wasn't completely in the game at all, I think that's like a bold choice, but also it's pretty telling that is pretty unanimously, I feel like, one of people's favorite episodes from this season. So
and on that, I think like watching that episode, I think going back into the game, because I think I started playing it like along with the episodes. So and then it was around episode 3 that I got up to. What's his name? Bill?
Yes.
Bill.
Yeah. I got up to that. I was like, oh yeah, there's these couple of references that references like him being gay and stuff. But yeah, that whole episode was like really well done, and it just when I first played it, I was like, oh, Bill's just some angry old grumpy dude, but now I'm like, he's actually a human. Like, he's actually.
I'd say for most people, your first playthrough of Last of Us, you barely even would have realized Frank existed. Like, it's a pretty offhanded mention.
Absolutely,
and I think, that it being brought into the show in such a large amount is super cool. I want to go too much into it because we're still technically spoiler free, but I feel like we should jump into spoilers.
No, I mean, well, I was gonna say, I think it is safe to say now that we are going to move into the spoiler territory.
Sorry, everyone.
If you have not watched the first season of The Last of Us, you can go watch that now on Binge. It's great. I actually watched last night like the half an hour little extra ep on like how they made it, and just it was so great. But I guess we can go into now like the things we liked and didn't like about the series. One of the main things for me, things I like definitely outweigh the things I didn't like. There's very, very few things I didn't like about this. But the main thing was the lack of the infected that we saw. For me, it was just a thing where going through the 9 episodes, we get tiny little moments talking about infected, maybe seeing a few infected. There's one great moment. Is it episode 5 where they come out of the ground?
Yeah.
That's
so we have that really cool scene, but it felt for me as the series went along that there wasn't that much of a threat and there wasn't that much at stake, and it kind of also then affects when people are watching it. You're kind of like, well, why is getting her to the Fireflies so important? Because like this threat doesn't seem that great. It's like it seems like people can live a normal life and live you know, on the outskirts of countries and not have to worry about infected. Why is it so important to get her to the Fireflies? So that's my main thing. I wish we saw more infected and just a little bit more action. I know that they wanted to dive into more the emotional aspect of this story. They did a great job at it, but I feel like just to keep you engaged, I feel like just seeing a little bit of more action scenes, just really showing like because I was really hoping that once episode 1 ended and we see them walking into the city, I was really hoping that it was going to open up of them having to travel up and down the 2 buildings that have fallen over like what happened in the game. That is a really intense moment and your first sort of interaction with the infected. We do get a little bit of that in episode 2, but they definitely skip a large chunk of the action of that of those moments. But yeah, Ben, how do you feel about all that?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree. I think that is probably the infected and how that was treated is probably my main gripe with it. I actually like the change they did where they changed it from being spore based to being a bit more of a network and all how that kind of worked and like that kind of early warning signal for the infected and that kind of thing. I think that's a cool concept, but then to bring in such a cool concept and then I feel barely use it meant I didn't feel like it was particularly like a threat. As you mentioned in episode 5, I feel like it's the only time you really see a horde of them. And that's the only time I could, if I hadn't played the games, it's the only time I fully believe that like this is a zombie, like this is an infected outbreak. Like this is not. Whereas like the rest of the time you're just being told it, but you'll see an occasional single infected or a small group of infected, and I think it's. Part of me is like it's probably down to budget and like the amount of makeup and all that kind of stuff that went into it. But then again, it's HBO and there's clearly a lot of budget in this show, so I feel like that's less and less of a defense for TV these days, especially when it's these big budget productions. Absolutely. And I definitely agree. Like taking them out of some pretty core moments. The one you mentioned at the start where that big tower scene, I was disappointed we didn't get that. I think the bit where they go to the university, overall I think I was a little bit disappointed by, particularly because that's a bigger section in the game and a lot more infected there, and like it had to be shoehorned into the end of an episode because of runtime, it felt, but like that all fell a bit flat to me, and I think a lot of those moments come down to just a willingness not to show the infected as much of it, because we get a pretty clear example in this show that like humanity is bad, and they're telling us that humanity is more of the problem than the infected, and at its core that is a big part of like the story of The Last of Us, is that the infected are not always the main threat, but the infected are still a big threat in the games. You fight a lot of infected.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Josh, is there anything that you liked or
I think coming off what you guys have said, like I agree with the zombie, like not the zombies, what do I call them? The infected.
Infected.
Like because like in the game there was like the humans and the infected were like equal, but like what they took out of the infected they put into the humans.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
So that's what I think. Yeah, because like the humans became more of a threat, and we saw that.
Yeah.
More in the second set of people towards the end of the
the David and his
yeah
group?
the religious cult guys,
the creeps.
the absolute creep. But but also there were like moments in the episodes, like the series, where, for example, like the this is spoiler part, right?
Yeah, we're in spoilers.
Cool. So like the fire scene at the end, like that was like really like I liked it how it was like almost like frame for frame, like of the game
from the game. Yeah. I see. That's a tough one to say.
Yeah. So yeah, I liked how they like for key moments like that they did frame for frame. But yeah, and then also what I didn't know was that with the episode with Ellie and Riley, that was like the DLC.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Will, and he said that it was like almost like accurate to the game.
Yeah,
just
it's
like
pretty bang on.
Over. But like I had no idea. Like I went into it. I was like, oh, they made a backstory for Riley and Ellie. But yeah, I think that was like really good to actually see that on the screen. And just that dynamic between Ellie and Riley just was really good as well.
Yeah.
I think they did the backstories of some of the characters really well.
I was actually really surprised that a whole episode was kind of like built around that story, being that's not a part of the original game and that it is a DLC that you can play after the fact. It's a DLC that I've seen parts of on YouTube, but I haven't played it myself. But no, I thought it was very interesting that it was included, and I think it was a really good episode as well. And like there are other moments like that where they would either change slight things about the game to the series. Like we are introduced to Sam and Henry in one of the episodes, the two brothers, and Sam in this adaptation is deaf. I thought that was a really cool aspect because it makes you think about many other sort of things about the character in terms of how does he sort of survive in this world now, like he can't hear anything, like how does he know if he's making noise. It's very similar to one of the characters in the Quiet Place films. The daughter in those is deaf, and in a movie where you have to be quiet, she can't tell if she's making noise. Are there small changes like that along the way that you guys felt were good or bad, Josh, if there's anything that sort of screams out at you?
No, I don't think there's anything that I can think of, but like that was a good little change.
Small changes, definitely the little flashback we got at the start of episode 2 that they put in with the in Indonesia with the mycologist there who was like basically learning about the fact that cordyceps have mutated, and just like seeing not only the terror on her face and like how quickly she turned, but also just seeing like the origins of this infection, because that's not something we get the luxury of in the game, and I don't think it would work within the game. But seeing like an early part of that in the show, even if it was early for like 10 minutes or so, it's just like very cool. And like, the line where she goes like bomb all the cities was like, just damn. Which again, it unfortunately comes back to like later on, you're like, well, why did you bomb it? Like, did it work? Like, what's...
In hindsight, it wasn't a good idea.
I'm trying to think about other small changes because there's a big change I want to talk about.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, while you think, one thing I want to bring up is that obviously in the series, in the game, an element of the infected is the spores, and that is an element of the infected that we don't see in the series. There was a lot of people that were quite upset about that, but the way I see it is that in the show, we aren't ever in an environment where spores will be present. Like there isn't
yeah.
any like scenes where they go underground to like a subway tunnel or underground in general, where the spores thrive. So I'm really hoping that spores, and I'm not going to say much for season 2, just for those who haven't played part 2 of the game, but spores, there's a big moment in part 2 of the game involving spores. I'm really hoping that they do keep that in, because that's one of the things I'm looking forward to.
I believe Neil Druckmann has said there is potential for it as well. I don't think they've totally ruled it out. And I think they did a good job of slotting in their like new like network,
for sure,
mushroom network system into that. Like I think the museum scene where we first meet the clickers. I think in the game has some spores and stuff, but the way they tweaked that to work around.
I just wish I saw more of that, Ben.
Yeah, totally. And like the clickers are so cool. Like the clickers, in my opinion, in terms of media in general and like zombie media, I know they're not zombies, but like they are one of the coolest versions of that kind of character. Absolutely. And like, it's just, it's a shame we kind of see some of them in the Horde in episode 5, but then they just barely exist, or there's only like one of them after that. But the other kind of smaller change I did want to mention is when they, in episode 6 or in the middle somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, when they go and meet Tommy in Wyoming, and that episode, which initially took place near the dam and stuff, basically takes place entirely within Jackson, which is the town we know from Last of Us Part 2. And I think that was a great decision because it helps set up the world of The Last of Us 2. Because when you jump into The Last of Us 2, the game, it's a little bit like, what? Like, this is here all along. Like,
it's like, whoa.
I've spent like 10 hours going through this dilapidated country with none of these settlements, and then this is here. Whereas having it within the middle of this season, I think makes it much more believable in season 2 that's going to be a thing. And I think it also serves Tommy's character a lot better, because one of my things, again, won't go too much into The Last of Us 2, but Tommy plays a pretty decently big role in that. And one of the things I struggled with in that game was not really knowing / caring a lot about his character. But I think weaving him a bit more into the story here and giving him those stakes a bit earlier on will only come to benefit them going forward. Also, I think it's not Diego Luna, it's the other Luna. Gabriel Luna did a fantastic job with that as well.
Oh, he was amazing.
The big change I did want to talk about that we kind of touched on earlier, but in episode 3, where they basically, it's not Joel and Ellie are in it for about 10 minutes, and then it is an entire side story about Bill and Frank, and particularly Bill and this life that he's lived within the apocalypse. And I think just like unexpected for everyone, but also the most pleasant surprise. I know some people have some issues with it and feel like it doesn't have as big of a place in the show, and like I get that, like it's probably like in the overall scheme of the show maybe take some time away from other stuff in the core story, but I really like they spent such a large amount of time on this B story. And from a perspective of someone who is queer as well, the fact that they had a story about queer people set in what is a really fucked up world that was actually really positive and had a largely positive and happy ending, because queer people don't get that a lot in media, let alone in this kind of media. It's like very rare that you're going to get two people actually have such a lovely and wholesome story. And I think giving that time to Bill and Frank, because as Josh kind of said earlier, Bill is kind of a bit of a nothing character and an unlikable character in the game, and like he's supposed to be unlikable, and like he's not, I wouldn't say he's necessarily lovable in this show, but like you come around to like his way of thinking a little bit. Like he's clearly a doomsday prepper and everything, and has some weird beliefs in that capacity, but then like you see the way that Frank was able to soften him over time and like make him like understand different ways of living and that kind of thing. I think that's lovely.
And like through that you see like a very human side of him, which you wouldn't have gotten in the game at all.
Totally. I loved it so much. I think it's Yeah, it's kind of this thing where I don't feel like I necessarily belongs in that this show, but I'm so glad we still got it within this show because I don't know where else we'd get it. And yeah, like the only similar kind of queer story I can think of is San Junipero from Black Mirror, and that's an anthology series. So that kind of makes more sense in there. But yeah, I'm happy they took the risk, and I'm glad it seems to be paying off for most people. That most people like this was like a fantastic choice. Nick Offerman, like I did not know Nick Offerman had that in him. As a huge Parks and Rec fan, someone who's seen like a comedy show of his live, like he's a very funny person, but I did not realize he had that kind of dramatic performance in him. And so good. I can't remember the name of the other guy, but the guy who played Frank was also very, very good. And yeah, the fact that I was so certain because of the fact that we know Bill from the games, and that we know that he was alive, like when we meet him in the games and stuff, I was so certain that it was going to be some kind of tragic ending, or like even when like he revealed that like they'd both taken, he'd put like pills in both the drinks, I was like worried that like, oh, it's not going to work or something. And I'm glad, I'm really glad they stuck with it and were like, no, this is the ending they chose. And like, it could so easily not have been that, but I think you have to give them a lot of credit for like identifying that decision going the other way would have probably done more harm than good. For sure. Because
I remember as well, I was listening to the podcast that would come out each week along with the episodes. And I remember for episode 3, it was such an important episode that they were going to make, and they knew why it was going to be important. So they went to the lengths of making sure that like a lot of the crew were queer, and you know, like they wanted to really just include people in the episode that had the right to be there, even to the extent where the actor who plays Frank is queer in real life as well. So they wanted to make sure that at least one of the actors was queer, so that he could really dive into that sort of into the character he was playing and have it be the best
version of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And they brought in an entirely different director for it as well.
That as well. And stuff.
And it's
Like they definitely pulled out all the stops to make sure
and it's like
it was done right.
That's how it should be done, but that's not how it's always done. So like, you know, it's like, and especially in a big budget production, you know, they deserve credit for doing all that. And I think it shows, it pays off, because when you watch the episode, it becomes more believable.
Yes.
Like I think for anyone, even for people who aren't queer, it still reads as more believable because the people telling the stories know what it's like.
Yeah.
So
no, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We briefly spoke about like the flashbacks in terms of like how the infection started and all that stuff. I loved all that sort of like all those parts throughout the episodes. One thing that was brand new in the series that isn't in the game was that we saw Ellie's mum. We saw Ellie being born, and we saw the way that she has become immune. I thought that was a really, really cool aspect of the show, just to give it a bit of a backstory as to how she is immune, because in the game, it's kind of just, I'm immune. And it's like, but how? Like, you know that it's got something to do with like her DNA and her genes, like somewhere along the road, something has happened. But to know that it was like from birth, this thing happened, and it's not, even in the scene we get, it's not like entirely spoon-fed to you how it has changed her DNA and how she is able to be immune. But I think that's a good choice, because it just allows the audience to leave it to their own interpretation.
Yeah, I think on that, I think the more you add to that explanation, the worse it gets and the dumber it sounds. Because that's the thing that I look at it and I'm like, I'm glad they included it, but I'm also like, it's a bit silly. It's a bit silly that they get bit, and like 2 seconds later she gives birth, and that's enough time. But like, if you think about it for too long, it kind of works into that thing. But I think what you're mentioning, in that they left it pretty open, and they were just like, it's clear that's what they were going for, but they didn't really dwell on it, and were just it was kind of a way of explaining it, and also incorporating Ashley Johnson into the show, which I thought she did a great job.
I actually didn't like. I knew she was going to be in the episode, but I just. Like I didn't actually like recognize that she was Ellie. Yeah. So I was like, I watched it. I was like, oh, that's cool. And I looked on the internet afterwards, and it was like, this is Ellie, and it showed the mother. I was like, oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like she gave birth to herself.
Totally, yeah. It's a cool symbolic thing on top of it, working within the TV of the show. The TV of the show. Anyway, I think she and Troy Baker's cameo as well. I was a little bit worried when they said they were both going to be cameoing and playing different characters. I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. That's going to be jarring. But I think I think both of them were like fantastic. Troy's was obviously a bit more detached from his character, which I think was also good. But I thought the role he did play was like very, very good and added more detail and more context to the David part of the story, which I think was important. And it, like, as much as I was like, I'm looking at Troy Baker, he did a good job of me not like, I didn't think like it was in the back of my head, but I wasn't thinking about it too much because he did a good performance. And like,
for sure.
I've listened to him talk about it since, and he's like, it was hard because like for him, that's not the kind of performance he normally does. He's not used to doing live action stuff. So it's like, I think credit has to go to them for sure. And I agree. I'm glad they kind of fed in that little bit with Ellie's mother at the start. One of the things I kind of think I wish is that we had a bit more about Ellie and Marlene's relationship, because we kind of learn here that Marlene like knew Ellie from birth, and then we know later that Marlene seemingly like refound Ellie and she'd been bitten and stuff. I kind of wish we'd got a little bit more like why they kind of sent Ellie off to this other school, what the deal was there. Like, that's the one bit where I'm like, I see a world in which it would have been nice to get a little bit more there. And I feel like that story has been tied up in a knot because Marlene dies at the end of this show. So it's kind of like that. Maybe I would have liked a little bit more there, but it's a minor nitpick. And I think kind of maybe getting a bit of Ellie's mother instead of that might be a good trade-off. So
I heard that this TV series was meant to be like a 10 episode thing. Was that right? Like,
yes,
I think it was episodes 1 and 2. They had joined them together.
Okay.
Sorry. I mean, like episode 1 was meant to be 2 separate episodes.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that if we had like the 9 episodes that we got plus an extra episode, like kind of space, I don't know, like an extra episode, do you reckon we would have been able to see more of what we wanted?
It's interesting. I feel like where they drew the line was good. I don't think the more episodes you add on and the more kind of backstory you try and add, it feels more and more like you're trying to emulate what the game is trying to do, because the more and more time you have, the more and more people are going to be like, why didn't you include this? Where they stuck to 10 episodes and they were like, we're going to cut out some bits, we're going to shorten some bits, we're going to add some bits. And that meant that it stood well on its own. Whereas no matter if they had more episodes, no matter what they add into that, I feel like people would then go more and more like, oh, well then why wasn't this bit from the game in it more, and why wasn't this bit in? So I think they had to call it at a point, and I think they made a good choice. I think there was times for all the episodes that leaked before the show, but it turned out that like most of them weren't right. I think, which is interesting. They only like the first episode they got right, and I think most of the rest of them were like 40 something minutes, and then all of them turned out being like 50 plus minute episodes, because when I'd initially seen that I was like, oh man, that's a lot to pack into that amount of time. But
for sure.
But I think they might have added in little bits extra where initially, like maybe that leak was from a while ago and stuff.
Yeah, because that was like my main thought, especially with episode 9. Like just seeing how short it was, I was like, well, you've got like the biggest like this is like your ending for like this story of part 1 of the game. Like, I was like, okay, cool. I mean, but look, I mean, I thought it was fine. But yeah, speaking of like, you know, that was the end of obviously season 1. I think it's safe to say that we all enjoyed it. What I want to do now is I want us to go around and briefly just have a chat about season 2 and part 2, I guess they might be calling it, and just to sort of see what we're feeling, like where we think it might go. Obviously, if you are someone who hasn't played part 2 of The Last of Us, maybe don't listen to this bit. If you don't want to be spoiled anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna say we're gonna talk about spoilers for part 2 in this. So if you don't want spoilers for season 2, or you want to play the game, or both, maybe you skip this part. Yeah, we like the show.
Thanks for being around anyway. We appreciate you. But yeah, so season 2 is confirmed. The information we have so far is that the story of part 2 of the game is most likely going to be covered through seasons 2 and 3. I think that makes sense because part 2 is a mammoth of a story compared to part 1.
That'd be a thick season.
Absolutely. What I would have loved, because I think it's very much going to happen where season 2 is just going to start from part 2 of the game. What I would have loved, just so that this show can last longer, is I would have loved if season 2, for the most part anyway, was actually based in between that time jump in between part 1 and 2 of the game. I think it's about a 7 or 8 year time jump that we get. But through that time jump, obviously there's the story element of Ellie slowly hating Joel. And we do get reasoning for that in part 2 through a flashback. I think exploring that further in the show would have been really sick, just to sort of see like what was her, like we see her first moment of doubt when she's asking Joel at the end of the show, can you tell me if it was true, blah blah blah, is that what happened? You can see her doubt there, but I would love to have seen like how that sort of grew into eventually her not wanting to have anything to do with him, and I think that if they did that as well, it would allow them to sort of create like new lore for like that for this world, and create a new story that doesn't have to rely on what's happening in games either. It can be a brand new thing. That's what I would have loved season 2 to be anyway. I don't think that's going to happen.
I think I think they said it's not. And I'm also a bit disappointed at their reluctance not to elaborate on it further. And I mean they might, looking at what this season has done, like they might focus more on that period, even if they're not going to do a full season. But I also kind of wish they seem to just want to be like, no, we didn't do the games, and that's what we're adapting. But I'm like, there is space to add in stuff in the middle here. Because like I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, but like the disconnect from part 1 to 2 in the games was always a bit of a struggle for me, not really necessarily fully understanding how the characters got there. And so I hope even if they're not going to do a full season of it, they try to add as much more context in the middle there. But yeah, I'll touch on my thoughts for that.
Go for it.
If you, so I think I'm fascinated to see who they cast as Ellie for Abby for one, because that's a big casting. We didn't even mention, but Laura Bailey pops up in the last episode of this, which is cool.
I did see
as one of the nurses. And people are speculating that maybe that's Abby's mum as well, like it was Ellie's mum. But I don't know if that'll be a thing, but that was kind of cool to see her pop up.
Yeah, cool.
Because it was Abby's dad who was the doctor that Joel shot.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Which I love that they just he just gone. He did not even have any. Like I thought they might like amp it up a bit more, because like in the game it was very similar where you just killed him. Whereas I thought in the show, because they knew what's coming, they might be like, oh, it's going to be a whole thing. But no, he's just gone. He's just out.
I mean, there was 100% a very very long hold on a shot of him.
No, there was.
But I think with that being just so quick as the game, it'll give like more reason for Abby in season 2 or wherever she rocks up to be like, you didn't care for my father. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like it was just a quick second. Like it was as if he was infected sort of thing.
Yeah,
just like,
totally. And
he didn't care.
I think I like that they really doubled down in that final episode on Joel made this fucked up decision, and you can't deny it, no matter what your thoughts are on like if he was right or whatever, and that's a whole argument itself. It's a pretty messed up decision to make, because he killed a lot of people. And like that, I think part of my worry was earlier on in the show, I was like, man, Pedro Pascal is going to be too likable for people to like deal with what is going to happen in part 2. And I know I've talked to Will specifically, and Will is like, I'm not watching part 2.
Yeah.
For that reason. But it's like, I think that like towards the end of the show, we have the scene where he pops the person's kneecap and stuff, and like you really see those darker elements of Joel. Yeah. And I think that's going to do wonders for that part of Last of Us Part 2, because as we're all aware, that is by far and away the most contentious part of that game, is Joel's death and when he dies and stuff. And so I think setting as much groundwork as they did for that early on is important, and I think they've done a pretty good job of it. But yeah, fascinated to see who they cast as Abby. I'm fascinated to see how it's structured. Yeah, because I would say Last of Us Part 2 structured quite differently to Last of Us Part 1. It jumps between a lot of different settings.
It's also got like 3 different points where I think it's going to end, and then
totally. It's like, as we mentioned, it's a long game, so definitely will be split across 2 seasons. But I'm wondering if they kind of restructure the order in which a lot of that is told, because the show pretty much, I mean, Last of Us Part 1 as a game is a very linear story, and the show is largely pretty linear in that sense. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they kind of tweak how Part 2 is told to fit that more, or stay a bit true to the order in which those stories are told. Yeah, it's gonna be wild. It's gonna be a period on the internet where a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions, but I am very excited for it, because I think I'm personally hoping that it answers a lot of my qualms as well with Part 2, because I prefer Part 1 to Part 2 because it's just for a variety of different reasons, which I'm not going to get into now. But I'm hoping, given how much this show has been willing to like change stuff up so far, I'm hoping that maybe watching it in TV form, I will enjoy it a bit more. And yeah, I'm excited. Unlike some people on the internet, I'm very excited to see how Bella Ramsey evolves into the character, because I think she's going to do a fantastic job.
Absolutely.
As a more grown-up Ellie. People are like, she looks so young and stuff, and I'm like, she in real life is the age that Ellie was in that game, basically. Totally. So I can totally see the transformation happening. You can see the roots of it in her character already. You can see she has the acting potential to pull off what will be her, like, she is the center of that story. She and Abby is the center of that story. So very excited. Don't think we're going to get it for another couple years probably as well.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is that Pedro Pascal was doing an interview, and someone asked him, they were like, do you think Last of Us Part 2 will come out sooner rather than later? And he said, we're due to start shooting at the end of this year, possibly. So interesting. I think it would be very... It's interesting because, if they start shooting end of this year, it could come out as early as end of next year, maybe. But I would say over the next like 2-3 years.
And I'm also curious if it's going to be a Avengers Infinity War Endgame scenario where they're shot at the same time, so they come out soon after each other, or if it's going to be shot separately.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I can 100% see that happening, because if they are covering like that entire story, but they're just going to split it, I think, so that it's easier for like the writers, the cast, everyone to sort of keep track, it would make sense to kind of do it that way. But Josh, is there anything that you're looking forward to going forward?
I think... I don't know. I'm just excited to see what they do in the next couple of seasons.
No, totally. I think that's what I was saying as well. I was just trying to spruce it up a bit more.
For sure. But I think, I don't know if this is what you guys were saying, but I was with Will like a week or two. I think just after the final episode release, and we were chatting, and we were talking about how like they might for season 2 do the Ellie side of the game. For season 2, and then do the Abby for part 3.
Okay.
And then
interesting.
So that it could do that, so that they can like fully delve into the stories, and that they'll be they might be able to beat up those parts.
Totally. I think that is definitely a structural choice they could make. That would be interesting because that would be a pretty big diversion from the game, but it could also be a way of dealing with it being split up like that. So that'd be super interesting.
Because there was no, sorry, Josh, you go.
Sorry.
You go.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say it could work well in trying to like just explain, like portray the story of like Joel dying and Ellie being affected by it, and I think in season 2 they could be like, oh, we hate Abby, like this Abby person, blah blah blah. She did it for being selfish and blah blah blah. But in season 3 it could be like Abby had a reason because he shot her father, and it was just a revenge thing. And it could, I don't know, it could probably turn people a little bit against Ellie, sort of thing, but that's what kind of happened in the game.
Totally.
I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I completely forgot, but Lev, I'm also really excited to see how they bring Lev into the story and have cool that entire bit, because
who was Lev again?
Lev was the little trans kid who Abby picks up.
That's right.
Yeah. And
one of the Tower Sky people.
Yes. That'll be a really cool scene to see. Like them having to travel like on top of the city. I think that'd be really cool.
I hope they do that, and I hope they do the scene where they're all on the island and it's like the island's on fire like that.
For sure.
I totally forgot how that game ended.
There's some there's some gorgeous set pieces in Last of Us Part 2, even more so than Part 1, I think. So I'm excited almost for the spectacle of that. As you mentioned earlier, with the spores as well, and the big bit in the hospital. I hope that is as terrifying as it is in the game.
For sure. One scene I really want to see, and this is why it would be good if they were going to take a minute to breathe and just have season 2 be like a brand new sort of story, not revolving around the games, but just a scene where Joel takes Ellie to the museum on her birthday, and like she sees a dinosaur, and then like they're in the space shuttle. All that I think would be really cool to see. And like he gives her like the pin and everything, I think would be really cool. There's a scene in the last episode of season 1 in episode 9 where as Joel is going through the hospital just mowing down all these soldiers, we see a shot of a girl with a ponytail who is running away from everything. People think that might be Abby. It could 100% just be a random Firefly who's running away. But if that is Abby, I think a really cool thing to do when we do first see her character, if it's like we're introduced to her of that moment of her running away from Joel as he's shooting everyone. I think seeing it from her POV would be really cool as well.
I would love it. I think that is Abby, and I think having that and having Joel be in the shadow in that moment as well, I think like would be really...
Like in the background, it's all blurred. And she's like, trying to just bolt.
Yeah, no, totally. I hope that is the first we see of Abby, because I think in the game, I think that's one of the reasons it hit so hard in the game and why people latched onto Abby, the Abby hate so quickly, was that we didn't get that bit of context before Abby killed him. And I think that is potentially something that I hope they change. Not for me personally, because I didn't have as big of a reaction to it, but I think in terms of the reception of it, having that moment beforehand, I think will do a lot to maybe deal with some of that in advance.
Absolutely. I think that's it, fellas. I think we've said our piece on what we think about the show. So overall, I think we all very much enjoyed it. If you did, let us know in the comments below what you think. Benjamin, I'm going to leave the outro to you because you know all of our info. I don't.
Neither do I. I'm useless.
You can catch us if you want more content like this, pre-recorded, spoiler casts, catch-ups, all those kind of jazz. You can head to youtube.com/each to their own and look at us on podcast services under Edo's Catch-Up. And there'll be a bunch of content you can find there where we chat about all kinds of games, comics, TV shows, movies, when they cross over like they do now. You can get a bunch of that there, plus some shorter form content. There's a 5-minute review of Will and his dad talking about this season of Last of Us, which will probably get way more views than this, and it should, because it's great. And if you want to catch us live, on almost every Monday, every second Wednesday, and probably every second Friday at the moment. You can head to twitch.tv/ETT online. I nearly said each their own. And you can catch us live there. And yeah, if you want to support us with your dollars, you can head to patreon.com/each their own. Couple dollars will get you into our Discord where we chat to people. We talk about all kinds of nerdy stuff.
Like The Last of Us?
Yeah, we have spoiler channels where we talk about this after every episode, so you can kind of get our early thoughts on it. And yeah, that's the whole rigmarole.
Amazing job, Ben. Amazing job from you.
Man,
but yeah,
I nailed it.
You did, as always. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Until the next time, I've been Sam.
I've been Finch.
There you go.
Yeah, and I've been Ben. He had to do it first that time.
Yeah, so I left the space for you, Ben. But yeah, anyway.
And remember, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light.